I'm Julie Bulitt. I've been a family therapist for over 30 years.
I'm David Bulitt. I've been a divorce and family lawyer for more than 35 years.
Together, we have been married for more than 37 years.
In our professional practices, the two of us have been witnesses to individuals and families struggling with life's most difficult challenges. In this podcast, we will talk about the conversations we have had,
The conversations we should have had,
and those that every relationship needs to have in order to find success, happiness, and fulfillment.
This is Conversations for Couples,
The podcast. Welcome. We are back on Conversations for Couples.
the podcast.
We always do that. So
It's like our thing.
It's our thing. Yeah. And we have Andrea and Bryan Ward today, we are really excited to have. We met Bryan a few weeks ago when we were on his podcast, the Dad's Up podcast. We'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit, but just a little background about these folks. Andrea is a teacher for 23 years. We're big teacher fans. As you folks who listen know, one of our daughters is a teacher. Bryan is a Marine Corps vet. He's the founder and host of this amazing podcast for parents called the Dad Up podcast, and they focus on parenting issues, insights into parenting. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. And the jump off point that I really want to start with, the two of you, is, and Andrea, I want you to weigh on this also, is that on your website, Bryan, you say, anyone can be a father. It takes someone special to be a dad. I want to make sure I had that right. So tell us what do you guys mean by that? Both, what do you mean in terms of your podcast, and Andrea, in terms of raising your two boys? What did that mean?
Yeah. Well, for me, when it comes to that tagline on my website, we know that anybody can become a dad through, biological or even being a step parent. But if you're not involved, are you really being the right dad? Are you really being an all-in dad? If you're not involved, you can be a dad by having a child, but if you're not around, does that child really develop that bond, a parent bond relationship with you? And so that's what I mean by that. Are you that type of dad where you're always there, you're always involved, you're developing that bond, that love, and that relationship with that child or children?
I think.
Go ahead, Andrea.
I think he's been a great example of this. He's been a father who, from the beginning, made the active decision to become a dad, to be all in, to be totally present, to be involved in the day-to-day, to be at everything he could possibly be at, to be as much a part of the raising of our children as I was.
Now, Bryan, you talked a little bit about there was sort of a cathartic kind of moment when you were sitting on the couch, you were sitting on a chair, and you had been either drinking regularly or drinking where your family thought you were having too much to drink. And so, Andrea, tell us about that piece and how that was important in terms of both your relationship and in terms of your parenting your two boys.
I think it was, a monumental decision that forever changed everybody involved's lives. It wasn't a decision. It wasn't like there was a tremendous problem. It was more of a decision that I can't be the 100% best father or best husband without giving this up. And so many people struggle with making that decision and committing to it. Mm-hmm. And they often say, well, you have to do it for yourself, which I think in great part is true. But I've watched him for over 15 years now actively make that decision every single day, not just for himself, but for me and particularly for our boys. And again, to be that dad that was all in, totally present, that was a decision he made to be the very best that he could possibly be.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I'm just curious, do you drink, or how does that work in the relationship?
So very rarely. Socially once in a very blue moon. Yeah. But no, it was something that was never really a big part of my life. My own father, much like Bryan, made the decision when I was a young child to not drink anymore. So it wasn't something that was a regular part of my culture. Mm-hmm. And when we married, we came from two really different backgrounds. It was a part of his culture. Mm-hmm. but no. So, I mean, for us today, we really just have made the decision, both of us, not to partake.
And I think for when it comes to her, it's, it's a decision that she chooses not to do, but I have not ever not told her she could.
Oh, no.
You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like we go, like we've, just in the last 6 months, we've gone to a couple of concerts and stuff, and she's had a glass of wine when we're at the concerts. That kind of stuff doesn't bother me. And I don't want to, if she enjoys that part of it, I don't want to take that from her just because I choose not to drink. That's her choice. It doesn't impact me in a negative way.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I've worked with, as a therapist, I've worked with a lot of couples that one is, in sobriety and the other isn't. And it can really complicate, the relationships, and also sometimes make it really hard for the person that's trying to stay sober. So I was just wondering, like, how did you guys handle that? So tell us a little bit about, Andrew, you mentioned sort of like the all-in dad, and I'm assuming that you've been, working full time. So how did you guys sort of come together and share the child raising?
You want to take it or you want me to?
Go ahead.
Well, we had the blessing, our kids, as well as 7 of my nieces and nephews, went to the school where I taught when they were young.
Oh boy.
Which was great. So I was with them all day, but when it came to any of those outside things, when it came to field trips or, a parent showing up for the class parties or those types of things, Bryan was always present, and we were blessed to have the job situations that we did, because our kids, had really present parents. And he was always really eager to jump in on those occasions where I had to stay behind at school and he got to go. Outside of school, it was great when the kids were younger and they weren't in my classrooms. It was easy for me to tackle like the homework and stuff when I got home with them. But as they got older, I've been with them all day. Yeah. And so, and they were at really difficult ages, to encourage them, get them to sit down and focus and do their stuff. And Bryan, again, just, eagerly jumped in, like, I've got homework, I've got projects from here on out, because it just would have been too much, I think, for not only me, but for our kids, if I was also managing that. And I have to say, I think their best projects ever came out of those years. It was really cute to watch and great to watch Bryan, construct castles out of vanilla wafers. And
Love it.
Our other son made a Barney castle. He made this big, beautiful purple castle.
Oh God, I hated Barney, by the way.
I did too, but it was a great castle though.
Yeah. So you guys have been talking a lot about, really working together and coming together as a couple. Do you, and how do you take time for yourselves? Because we're very big proponents of, connecting as a couple, but also having, your me time and the self-care time. So can you tell us a little bit about how you guys carved that out? If you did, were there, difficulties? Was it hard?
Yeah. I mean, when our boys are younger, when kids are younger, obviously it's much more challenging because, there's a lot of extra things you have to take care of. They're not self-sufficient, right? So you have to really take care of all the necessary things for them. As they get older, that gets a little bit easier, right? But for us, it was more about, and I've talked about this a lot on my show, it's more about the scheduling part of things. Andrea and I always talk about our weekly schedule, and then how can we incorporate not only our kids and what we have to do with them, but also incorporate times for ourselves. And like I said, as our boys got older and they were able to stay home on their own, I mean, that's like the best part, right? When you could, your kids could stay home by themselves and you're only gone for an hour or two for dinner and that's it. But we still, our boys are pretty much grown and out of the house, and we still take time for each other. We were just out on a date last night. We went to a really nice restaurant, just had a date night last night. We just kind of do those things because, and I've shared this with you guys, we do those things because we want to make sure we're still staying connected as a couple, especially being together as long as we have. Not quite as long as them, but as long as we have.
Right. Which I think for us has been a part of our self-care regime, is getting that time to go out with each other. But additionally, I think we've been really respectful of that with each other. When he needs a tag out, I was always there to say, hey, absolutely go for a run. Yes. Go do what you need to do. When I needed that same thing, it was go get your nails done, go do what you need to do, take that time. And I think probably one of the biggest things is I don't think we ever gave each other grief over that. Like there was never, well, you're getting too much of your own time. We were really respectful and appreciated the fact that we both needed a little bit of time 100% to ourselves.
That's funny because I would say that David was always really good about that, but then I wasn't. I would always be like, "What do you mean you scheduled a haircut without asking, or you get to go to the dentist without arranging a babysitter?" Like I was kind of like resentful. Some days, you know, having 4 daughters, there were some days where I wasn't by myself for 1 second. And, you know, even I would envision like him, he was at the office and if he wanted to go to the bathroom, he could go by himself. And I was a little resentful. So I would say.
You figured it out.
Yeah, we figured it out.
But we talk about, you know, that it's like that truck you see on the highway, you know, with the wide load sign, right? And you've got the pace car that's making sure that they're whatever it's half of a house or whatever they're dragging down the highway. You got that pace car making sure that wide load stays safe and gets from point A to point B. And so we always talked about, you know, okay, who's the wide load today?
Yes.
And I would know if I came in, I could just look at her face, right? And those are the days when there was no remote working. You know, now I work almost exclusively from home. But then, you know, those days I was carrying the big briefcases to the office and all of that stuff and coming back after 8 or 9 or 10 hours. And I could see, you know, her eyes were kind of crisscrossed, and I could see she needed to go get up in the bathtub or go poke around Nordstrom or whatever she does. I don't even care what she did.
Anything just to kind of get out for a second. But
it's cool that you do that you figured that you did
cool.
that.
Yeah. So we know that Brian's a really big runner, and that's probably a lot of your self-care and the time you take for yourself. But Andrea, I'm curious, I mean, you get your nails done. What other things do you do for self-care?
Well, I just finished my master's program. So for a year, unfortunately, and a half, there was very little self-care other than, you know, my time with my classmates and homework and everything else.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. Went back a little later in life. That was something that, you know, waited while the kids were young and it was a decision, but I'm glad it's done now. I hate to say, I wouldn't say I'm a runner because I can't comparatively say, oh yeah, you know, he's going out for a 10, 15 mile run and completing marathons, and I do like 3 miles on the treadmill.
That's what I do, and I have to tell you, good for you. Like if you can run 3 miles, I just ran 3 this morning, and I was like, check, done. I feel good. Nothing broke off while I was running. Yay!
Exactly. That's my guilty pleasure. Brian created a really great space in the garage for me with a huge TV and my treadmill right in front of it. And there is nothing better to me than zoning out for an hour and, you know, watching my Netflix and getting a little run in. That to me is the ultimate. So that's probably my favorite method of self-care, but I'm also, being an English teacher, a huge reader.
Yes.
Do you still, Brian mentioned a little bit before about how when you were scheduling your weeks, that you made sure you scheduled in that time for yourselves or either individually or together. Do you still do that now, even though the kids are out, or you find it that you don't really need to do that, or that you do it anyway, whether you need to or not?
Yeah, we typically will talk about it Sunday evenings, and it's typically we're just, you know, casually watching TV or something, and she'll say, hey, what do you have going on this week? And I'll ask her the same thing, and then we'll kind of compare notes. And then every single day, because I drive her to work, so I drop her off at her school every morning. Every single day we talk about it on the way to school. What do you have going on today? What's you know, that kind of stuff. So we do that. I mean, yeah, it's regular for us.
That's great. That's great. So what would you say, because there's a lot of, you know, younger couples out there that listen to the podcast that are like kind of in the midst of the, I would say the hard time, like the you know, on the
storm stuff,
on the front lines with the kids. What would you say was the most difficult, you know, sort of challenging part looking back at your relationship and your marriage?
I think for me, looking back at it, I say that there's no way you can balance everything that you're doing in your schedule, not only with your business or your career or your, you know, your extracurricular activities or things with your kids or things with your spouse. There's no way you can balance it all, but that's probably the biggest challenge, is trying to find a way to really balance it all and make it as complete everything that you need to do throughout the week with your kids, with your spouse, and giving enough time to each one of those things. I think that's probably the biggest thing, is the balancing part.
Yeah, I think along the first thing that jumped out at me along those same lines is finding the time to communicate effectively and in a productive way during those really busy years.
Yes.
By the time your kids go to bed and, lunches are made and bags are packed for the next morning and books are read, baths are done, it's hard to have the energy to then be, a productive communicator.
Yeah, you get kind of lazy or just worn out, really. It's like your energy. Yeah. Yeah. And I would say for David and I, definitely raising our kids. And we have one child that has pretty severe mental health and behavioral issues. That was probably the most challenging time for us, honestly. Like there was a lot of fighting between us, a lot of disagreements about how to, parent her and how to manage the other kids. And I have to say, I'm kind of glad that's over.
Yeah, and I think, Bryan, we talked a little bit about this, for us, and what's very cool, what I'm hearing as you guys are talking, is a lot of what we talk to people about that comes as second nature to the two of you, which is just awesome, because this stuff doesn't come as second nature to a lot of couples. The idea that we're going to catch up on a Sunday night or in the morning, we're going to check in with each other, even during the day or with a text or whatever it might be. That communication, that consistency, doesn't come naturally for a lot of folks. And for Julie and myself, we ran into a very bumpy period where we were just at odds over how to manage this child. And Julie took a very therapeutic approach, and rightfully so. And I took a very different, more of a 70s kid approach, which was, excuse my language, but the kid's a jerk. Okay, it doesn't matter how much medicine you give him; she's just a jerk. And of course, that was very simplistic and inaccurate. But there was a lot of bumping and grinding over in those years, and the effect that had on the rest of our kids. But the one thing that we were sure to do, and I want to ask you about this too, is that when we had a disagreement, most of our disagreements did revolve around her and how to manage her and how to make her better or help her and so forth. There were others, but we never really showed those battle lines or those differences in front of the kids. So if we were having these issues, they were in the laundry room or in the garage or when kids were going to sleep. So I want to ask you, and I'm sure you had differences in terms of, different child rearing thinking when an issue came up or that sort of thing. How did you manage those differences? And if at all, did they come out when the boys were around?
Yeah. Well, first, let me back up just first by saying that when it comes to things just coming naturally to us as a couple, it didn't. I mean, we've had to work on this over the years, and trust me, we still have our little bumps in the road as a married couple. I mean, it's just normal, right? So this is something that we have chosen to continue to work on. And I know I've addressed this with you before, but Andrea and I have a marriage coach that we go to every other month, and we've been going to her for years. And we do that because we want to make sure that our marriage stays healthy. Even, our boys are, it doesn't really matter to them, right? They're adults now, right? So, but it's still important to us. So it has been a continuous process where we have to work at it. But as far as our disagreements, there have been times where we've had our conversations in front of the boys, or our conversations that didn't necessarily get heated, but we were disagreeing on something, and we had to check ourselves, right? We've had those moments where we've said, wait a minute, we've got to table this for another time, whether it's tonight after they go to bed or whether it's tomorrow they're at school or whatnot. We need to table this for another time because this probably isn't the best time to have this discussion in front of them. So there were quite a few times where we would just go into our bedroom, even if they were, out and about. We'd go in the bedroom and just have a conversation. And, they're hard. They're tough to do because there's part of you that just wants to, be right and get it out and handle it right now. But at the same time, you've got to keep in mind that you have two little ones, or, however many kids you got at home. You got those little ones that are watching you going, oh, so that's how you handle that. Yeah. So that's how you handle that. Okay.
Yeah. We just, on our Instagram yesterday, we put up a post about one of my favorite quotes, which is, you can be married or you can be right.
Right.
choose wisely, right? So what you were saying, and I think that a lot of that, making sure that you table discussions and, communicate, in a different place is really about respect in the relationship. And I think that that's a key factor. It sounds like you guys really work hard to have that, between the two of you. And I love that you have a marriage coach. I think
Yeah,
that's just
I want
great.
to ask a little bit about the process, how that works. I mean, obviously know about what goes on when you're meeting with that person, but you're meeting with this coach every couple of months, and do you like keep a list of what you want to talk about, or is it a much more organic? We show up and we sort of go over what may have happened or how we can improve X, Y, or Z. I mean, is there I'm just wondering if you, I want to make sure I'm going to talk about that. You make a note on your notepad or on your phone or whatever.
So we've done both. We've done both. So there are those moments where, there's a, I call it a hiccup, in something that we're dealing with. There's a little hiccup. So I will go and we'll say it to each other. We'll go, let's bring that up with Karen.
Yes. Yes.
To help us work through that, because we don't want to make a mistake, say something that we're going to regret, be stupid in it and not really know how to handle it and handle it wrong. So we'll say, let's table that and let's talk about that with Karen. But I will say this, for the most part, I mean, we've gone into these meetings and Andrea can attest to this, but we've gone into these, I call it meetings. We've gone into these sessions with our coach and she's gone, okay, so what's going on with you? And we told them blah, blah, blah. And she's like, all right, what do you guys want to talk about? Because we're not, so then we'll just start conversing.
But what's great is when we do have those conversations happen organically, those are always the best sessions. Those I feel like are the ones that I walk out of going, wow. Like I didn't have any idea what we were going to talk about today, but I'm so glad we talked about what we talked about.
Yeah. And it's interesting because when David and we do some marriage coaching as well. And what we find is that people just like the support of keeping people like defined in their lane, the conversations and also the emotions. And that's a lot of what we do is helping slow down the conversations that might be triggering and help reword things and those kinds of things. So it's not a weakness that you need a marriage coach or that you have one. Right. It's smart. It's like just knowing that it's helpful. It's almost like wearing a retainer, right? Just like it helps you just kind of stay in line.
She's so good at metaphors. Every time. I can't even tell you. Who would have thought of that? Marriage coach is like a retainer. It's really good. Anyway, I add that to the list. She's the queen of metaphors. So let me ask a little bit about the podcast, how it got started, what you try to do with it. Andrea, what if anything you have to do in terms of support and what you do in terms of content? Tell us a little bit about that, because that's how we found you, and just have been really, really impressed. Obviously, we were on, but I watched a lot of the other episodes and the clips on Instagram, listened to several while I've been driving in my truck. So tell everybody a little bit about that, how it started and what you're trying to do with it.
Yeah, thank you very much for asking. It's it's been I say a hobby of mine for going on 5 years now, which is crazy to think. Today will be episode 260. Wow. Which is just insane to think about. But, for me, when our boys, let me just start by saying I know nothing. I don't know anything other than how to be a dad, right? That's my world. That's my life, right? Is I'm a dad. So when my youngest son, my older son was in college at the time, when our younger son was in high school and he was about to graduate, I went to her and I went, what am I going to do? She's like, what do you mean? And I go, I feel like my dad journey is coming to an end because our oldest is now off on his own. Our youngest is about to go off on his own. I said, don't get me wrong, honey. I'm looking forward to being an empty nester, but I feel like I'm lost now. I honestly, I went through a phase where I was kind of at this depressed, kind of down about it, thinking about it. Yeah. And so I started talking, I talked to Andrea and I talked to a couple other people in the family, and they said, why not a parenting podcast? You should talk to dads, and maybe, you've done so much around being a dad that maybe you can inspire other dads that might be struggling with something out there. And I thought, so I was talking to her about it. She's like, that would be great. You would be so good at that. And you should interview people. And so, yeah, I mean, that's how the ball got rolling. I knew nothing about podcasts. I didn't know how to start them. Started talking to different podcasters. And then one of my best friends was my very first episode on my show. And yeah, I mean, it's gone on from there. I've been on CNN, I've been in publications, I've been on radio, I've been all these different things have happened. But the one thing that I love most about it all, not any of that other stuff, the one thing I love most is meeting the people that I get to meet. That's awesome. What I love most about it is the connections and the networking that I get to do. More importantly, though, she has been an amazing rock for me through this whole thing, because there are times when it probably drives her nuts, because all I want to do is talk about the podcast. I got this guest coming on this week. I got to talk about this. I'm going to do it, and so I'm constantly talking to her about it. But for her, she has been like, you just do you. And she'll even give me like, oh, you're having that guest on? Why don't you ask him this? That would be a good ask question. Like, she'll give me a lot of the questions that I ask.
That's great.
So she's been a great support system for me.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome.
It's interesting, I sort of felt the same way when my youngest was off, when we took her off to school. And I'm an old Star Trek fan, right? Not the original series. And there was an episode, they took a quote from a Navy term called Captain Dunsel, which essentially refers to an officer who's no longer needed. Their job is done. And they just are there, but they don't need to do anything anymore. And I remember leaving Boulder, Colorado, saying, all right, I'm Captain Dunsel. She did, everybody. But the fact is, and you guys know this, parenting doesn't end just because they're living at home.
No.
And our job as a mom and a dad doesn't
never stop.
And so tell me just a little bit, and I don't want to keep you too much longer, but tell us a little bit about your relationship, both of you, with your boys now.
Yeah. Our parenting journey doesn't end. The one thing that I will say about that, though, is that our roles as parents changes.
Sure.
Depending on the ages that our kids go through, right? And like right now, they're in this adult phase of their life, these young adults, and they're making adult decisions. And so we were just on the phone with our oldest, who lives in Arizona right now, and he's getting ready to. He lives in a house with his best friend, but his best friend's fiance is about to have a baby. So our oldest son's like, okay, I have to move out. I can't. They're gonna have a kid. I can't live here. I'm gonna have to move out on my own. So we were on the phone with him for an hour yesterday talking about apartments. He was like looking at apartments. What do you think of this? And we're giving him advice on what he should look for in the kind of area. And so our roles as parents change, because now we're like guidance counselors, right? We can give the guidance, we can give the advice, but he doesn't have to take it. When he's 12 years old, we give him the guidance and the advice, and he probably should take it because he doesn't know what he's doing. Yeah. But now it's up to him. He can take it or leave it, and he has to deal with whatever comes of that decision. But for our relationship, I think my boys, there have been moments where I've had a challenging relationship with them, because it's, we butt heads, father and son butt heads, who's the alpha in the family, right?
Yeah.
But the cool thing about where they're at now in their life is I consider them two of my best friends.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
and I know that I could talk to them, even if I'm struggling with something, I can talk to them and they'll listen. They'll even try to help me out. But as they were growing up, I was because I was so involved, I wasn't necessarily the superhero that they wanted to look up to or they wanted to inspire to be. But they knew that they could count on me. They knew that, hey, if anything comes of this, I know my dad's got my back. I know my dad's here. I know my dad's with me. That's the kind of relationship that I had with them. And I think that's why I have such a good relationship with them now. I think that's why I consider them two of my best friends, because we had such a good bond as they grew up. So
that's cool.
And then yours is different, because yours is, you're the mama bear, and you're the,
Yeah, but I think I would describe them in the same way. They're two of my very best friends at this point. I look so forward. I love hearing about their work days. And like you said, I love bouncing things off of them now that, things when they were younger, I never would have, told them about my work day that I share now. And often they've got great advice and great perspective. And I love that. I love the phase of life. Actually, I thought I would hate being in this phase of life. I dreaded every moment, kind of like Bryan, of them growing up and leaving the nest. And I couldn't imagine that life would be so great. But I love this phase of life.
Yeah.
And I
that's
love
awesome.
being an advisor, because they still, I think both of them, still their secret holder, they like to tell me things, which I love. And I'll advise. And like you said, at this point, they don't have to take my advice. But I love that there's more respect for that advice now, versus when they were 13 and mom and dad don't know anything.
Now you've gotten to be so
Right,
smart.
a lot smarter.
Right? All of a sudden, I know a few things. We both do.
I love that.
I think.
I love that.
You're stupid when they're 12 and you're brilliant when they're 18 or 19, something like that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
You guys, this has been so wonderful to talk to you. We are so grateful and honored that you agreed to come on the podcast, especially for you, Andrea, because I'm sure Bryan was like, "We're going to do this," and you're like, "What?"
Yeah, this is not my wheelhouse.
Exactly.
You wouldn't have known that.
You're really great.
That. So, Bryan, if folks want to see or listen to your podcast, or even maybe get a hold of you to get some other type of support, what's the best way for folks to do it? Obviously, everyone, this will be on our show notes as well.
Yeah, thank you. It's I'm on any social media channel, but it's mainly Instagram. Dad Up Podcast is where they can reach me. They can send me a DM. Unless you send me a weird DM, I'm probably not going to respond to that, but I do respond to all my DMs. And then as far as the podcast go, you can find it anywhere. It's on YouTube, it's on Apple, it's on Spotify, it's on it's on Amazon, it's on iHeart, it's on all those places you can get your audio podcast, but YouTube as well. It's all Dad Up Podcast. And my show comes out every week. It actually drops on Sundays, comes out every single week. And sometimes it's just me. Sometimes I've had Andrea on a few times, but most of the time it's with guests. And as far as sending me a message, my email, obviously daduptribe@gmail.com. That's my email. Andrea handles all my emails. So she manages all that stuff for me because she's good at scheduling and stuff like that. So
Great.
Well,
Thank you guys so much.
For everybody out there, if you're a parent, if you're planning to be a parent, if your kids are young, if they're not young, you really ought to give Dad Up Podcast a listen and a watch. It's just terrific. It's insightful. He's got awesome guests, particularly two that were on a few weeks ago. And again, we want to thank you very, very much. We are the Bullitts, TheBullitts, and we are at the Bullitts on Instagram, on Facebook, on TikTok,
even
on YouTube.
Pinterest.
Pinterest? We have a Pinterest.
Yes, we do. We have. We're not very active on there, but
I'm afraid to know what's on Pinterest, but there you have it. Thank you guys so much for being on. We will see you next time on Conversations for Couples,
the podcast.
Julie Bulitt is a professionally licensed clinical social worker and family therapist. David Bulitt is a divorce and family lawyer. Julie is not your therapist, and David is not your lawyer. This podcast is meant for educational and entertainment purposes only.